Welcome to Qualified Opinions, where we test the ideas and limits, the knowns and known unknowns around freedom and order in contemporary politics and society. We invite you to listen as we engage with leading and emerging thinkers across disciplines and issues who will sharpen our thinking on the topics shaping our discourse. With deficits around $2 trillion for the foreseeable future, the debt exploding to 180% of GDP within 30 years, Social Security and Medicare becoming insolvent in less than 10 years, the federal government is increasingly desperate for new sources of revenue. The newest big idea is to raise money by ending the tax treatment of 401k and other tax-deferred savings accounts. The calls are coming from scholars on both the right and the left who question the value of such a tax break. I think it's a big deal, and that's why I'm delighted to welcome my dear friend Jason Fichtner to talk about this. Jason is a chief economist at the Bipartisan Policy Center and the executive director of the Retirement Income Institute at the Alliance for Lifetime Income. Welcome to Qualified Opinion, Jason.
Thanks for having me, Vero. It's good to be on the show.
So first, I want to ask you, tell us a little bit about how you got there. Tell us a little bit about your work, the path for your work.
Well, I think the important thing, to keep it relatively short, is how I got involved in retirement savings in general. And it goes back over 20 years ago, and I used to be a senior economist on the Joint Economic Committee for the United States Congress. And there's a senior economist that was responsible for doing research on retirement savings and investment, including the taxation of mutual funds and how we could help promote savings and help people promote their own retirement. And 20 years ago, you started seeing the decline of the defined benefit pension plan as we were moving into a defined contribution world. And then after, when I was at Congress, I went to work for the Social Security Administration, where I was the principal deputy commissioner, which is the number 2 position at the agency, as well as their first chief economist. And being at Social Security, you see the importance of Social Security, but also realizing that Social Security is not designed or intended to be the sole form of income in retirement. For the average worker, it's designed to replace roughly at most about 40%. So you have to have more. And you realize the importance of savings and how we help people save. And that's where we talk about the 401k plan and defined contribution plans and how that fits in together. And after Social Security, I went on to teach for a little while now at the Bipartisan Policy Center. And then the Retirement Income Institute's sole purpose is to help people have a dignified, secure retirement, looking at other sources of protected income along with Social Security, but annuities and drawdown strategies, and how we can help people take their nest egg, their defined contribution nest egg, and turn it into a stream of income in retirement. And I think what for people to understand is we've gone along with the system where people save, and save. They get to retirement with this nest egg and don't know how to turn that into income. They're used to getting a paycheck when they work. We want to make sure they get a paycheck when they retire, and that's kind of taking that defined contribution assets and turning it into a stream of income. Think about it as being income as the outcome in retirement.
Yeah, that's super interesting. One thing in particular that you said is striking to me because it's so different from the message that we get about Social Security. And it is that Social Security is not meant to be the main source of retirement income when people retire. It's so different than the message we're getting now about Social Security.
And it's really important because, again, if you think back to, we used to talk more frequently about the three-legged stool of retirement. Mm-hmm. Again, a stool with 3 legs is stable. It's a stable platform. And the 3 legs were supposed to be Social Security, your employer pension plan, mm-hmm. and your own personal savings. And you could say it was 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. That was the stability. Well, again, Social Security is designed for 1/3, no more than 40% for the average worker. The defined benefit plans, so DB plans, have basically gone away. So now that employer plan is basically a DC plan, but you still need your own savings. So when people start talking about the importance of Social Security, they should talk about in the context holistically that it's only designed to be about 1/3 or upwards of 40% of your income in retirement. It's not the whole thing. And so we need to talk about any kind of reform to the retirement system, including Social Security, holistically. And it's not designed, and Social Security was not designed to be the sole source of income for everybody. For low lifetime earners, it'll replace roughly 80%. So for them, it might be, but I don't think it's still enough. But again,
how many people are we talking about here? Like as a share of the whole?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, it depends on, I don't have the data in front to show how many are lifetime low earners versus medium or high, but think about this progressively. So the idea is a Social Security payroll tax, you pay Social Security payroll taxes up to a maximum cap, which is like 168 right now. And then you don't pay anymore, but you do pay for Medicare. And what's designed is if you're a high lifetime earner, someone who's been paying the maximum for most of their life, you will get a lower replacement rate. So when you think about how much income you earn from Social Security, it's going to be around that 30%. For someone who's a lower lifetime earner, they're going to get a higher replacement rate. So the benefits are progressive and they could get up to 80 or 90%. That doesn't mean they get more money. It just means they get a higher replacement rate.
Yeah.
So again, Social Security, and this is important too for listeners, it is the old age and survivors insurance.
Your insurance,
program. And we think about what is insurance, right? You have car insurance, house insurance. Insurance is designed to cover high cost, low probability events. When you started Social Security, if you got Social Security at 65, you really didn't live much longer, or you didn't make it to 65. So again, it was insurance for those who got to that age and would outlive their savings. So it was old age insurance. Now it's morphed into a retirement program, but it was never designed to be that. And that's what we need to talk about this holistically as part of a three-legged stool.
What's interesting too is like a few weeks ago, I talked with David Bunsen about the ethic of work. And one of the things he was talking about, which I think is actually pretty interesting, is this idea that this retirement mentality, right? He thinks it's actually quite counterproductive. And he's right that this idea that you should have a 25 years vacation at the end of your career is actually quite a modern idea. And this is not what Social Security was designed to do. It wasn't designed to be, people were actually, the reason why it was created, if I remember correctly, is because at the time, there were no capital market that actually allowed people to save so much money for retirement. And when you were poor and old, very often, if you couldn't work, you were really poor, right? And that's what it was created for. And so there was this kind of like mindset that you would work much longer, when now we have this mindset that, we should be actually kind of planning so we can have this, David says this 25-year vacation at the end of your life. And I think it's a good point. I never actually thought about it this way.
Well, it's also think about someone who, let's say you start working at, 25. So if you actually go through college and grad school, you're 25. But if you start at 18 or 21, you're talking about 40 or 45 years of work to finance what is going to be now 20, 25 years of retirement. The math doesn't work from a Social Security standpoint. Yeah. And again, as you mentioned, 65, we still have this anchor age at 65 as retirement. And so there is a conversation to retire the word retirement.
Yes.
Because what does it mean anymore? When you basically have people who can work to 70, some can't, don't get me wrong. Some people, not everyone can work to 65.
Yeah.
But the idea that we still have this cultural anchor that 65 is traditional retirement, we kind of have to move past that. Because for a lot of people now, they continue to work. Sometimes they want to work. But it's also thinking about what that means for saving, investment, and for our social programs like Social Security, because longevity's increased. Back when they started the program, again, if you were lucky to get to 65, maybe you had a few more years on you, but now the average age that people live to is well into their 70s and some are 80s. And now we're seeing more people turn into, getting to 100. And so that is the program designed to fund that. And again, thinking about retirement, and I don't want to call retirement a vacation, but thinking about what it means to be active. It's your next chapter of life. And I think we should talk about what that means for people and how they can fund that sort of lifestyle, whether it's full-time work, part-time work, or stopping work at all.
And what, if I remember correctly, Chuck Blauhaus, my colleague at Mercatus, who is a trustee for Social Security and Medicare, he actually says that there's a real tax penalty for those who are semi-retired and who want to continue working, right? Or is it just actually if you're past the retirement age, if you want to work, there's a tax penalty. If you want to actually kind of start cashing some Social Security and then work on top, that's where the penalty comes in. I can't remember exactly.
You continue to pay payroll taxes if you have covered employment. And so the thing is that if you think about the idea of you're paying into an insurance program that provides benefits, after a certain while, you are paying more, but not more back. And that is where the penalty comes in some ways.
So let's actually set the stage for the conversation about these new proposals that we hear more frequently. And that is Social Security financially is in trouble, and part because of demographic, and part because of this change in mindset, because we're expecting so much more from it than it was actually designed to do. So how big of a trouble is Social Security in?
Put it this way, if we don't do anything at all, so Social Security, some would tell you that there is no problem with Social Security because it's considered a self-financing program, which is technically correct, meaning the program has no borrowing authority on its own, and it can only pay out in benefits what it collects or has coming in revenues, which includes the trust funds. So right now, the Social Security Trust Fund for the retirement program is projected to be depleted in 2033. So that's less than 10 years from now. It does not mean bankrupt. Again, what it means is that the program can only pay out in benefits what it has in revenues, which means current payroll taxes in 2023 would pay benefits, but it'd only be able to finance about 75%.
So it's a 25% cut across the board if Congress does nothing. So when President Biden, or actually Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, said what he said yesterday on CNBC, which is that he's in favor of a fiscal commission as long as it doesn't raise taxes and doesn't cut Social Security and Medicare. It means he's in favor of effectively a cut on Social Security because,
yes.
Well, actually, no, you can read it as him saying that Congress is going to have to do something. But
yeah, and the default option of doing nothing means there's a benefit cut, and you could argue whether or not Congress would let that happen at the last minute. But with each successive year we delay, the cost of the change, the magnitude gets greater and greater. So if we waited to 2033, we'd have to increase our payroll taxes by at least 4 percentage points. So
yes.
12.4 to 16.4, and that's a huge increase.
And that's where basically looking for revenue kicks in,
yes.
right? It's because one of the options I'm sure that Congress would prefer to do, rather than have to cut benefits or raise the payroll tax, would be to actually borrow and transfer money from the general funds to Social Security. I mean, like, I know that for Medicare and Medicaid for over 30 years, we're talking about borrowing $116 trillion or something like this. It's less I think for Social Security, it may be like 35 or 45 or, around there for, how much is it for Social Security?
The unfunded liability is somewhere around the $40 trillion mark.
$40 trillion, yes.
That's our national.
No, I mean, that's the thing, right? It's like the reason, I'm just always amazed that no one's actually freaked out by these numbers, because I always say in the entire history of our country, right, we've borrowed $35 trillion from the public, but also from other account in the government, $35 trillion. And we're talking about just for Social Security alone, having to borrow more than we've borrowed in the entire history of the country.
And I think you start throwing around numbers with a one in front. So you talk about $1, 10,000, 100,000, a million, a billion, a trillion, and people lose the scope of the magnitude of what that means. $1 trillion has, what is that? Is that
12 zeros?
Zeros? So putting this in your head so you can think about what this looks like, then we'll talk about the revenue stuff. But I want people to understand what $1 trillion actually is. Imagine if you had a stack of $100 bills. So everyone knows what a $100 bill looks like. Mm-hmm. You had a stack that was a ½ inch thick, right? So basically as thick as your finger or two fingers, that's $10,000. If you had a stack of $100 bills that could fit into a backpack, a school-sized backpack, that's $1 million. You could walk around $1 million and no one would know because it'd be $100 bills in your backpack. But that's just $1 million. You want to talk about $1 billion, that's going to be a construction pallet, the kind you need a forklift, right? That's going to be $1 billion. You want $1 trillion, you've got to take one of those pallets, double it, and then fill up a football field. Wow. That's going to be $1 trillion. And our national debt, 36, we got about 36.
36 is 36 now.
So it's a lot.
It's a lot of money. But I think the visual of in the lifetime of this country, we've borrowed $36 trillion. And we're basically Congress, if Congress does nothing or actually resorts to the easy kicking the can down the road. I mean, easy maybe politically, but not economically. I think the consequences would be dramatic. it would just for this one program alone, it would require borrowing in the next 30 years, like more than we've borrowed in the entire history of this country. And that is actually a major transfer of those who are relatively poor and young towards those who are relatively old and wealthy. So let's dig in. So the proposal that we've seen floating around, and really on both sides of the aisle, it's still not like a major, like it's not, it's not widespread, but it is scholars that are kind of important enough that I think it's worth taking it seriously, is to end the tax treatment of 401ks and different savings accounts. So can you actually tell us about these tax treatments and these savings accounts and what they're there to do?
So generally, if you think about a defined contribution plan that you have through your employer, so you got 401k if you're in the private sector, or 403b if you're in a nonprofit, or if you're self-employed, you might do an IRA, an individual retirement account. Those types of things are considered tax deferrals. So I want to be very careful when we start talking about taxes. You know me, I'm tax language. Mm-hmm. These aren't tax cuts; they are tax deferrals. Mm-hmm. And what that means for some of these, like your one you do with your employer, you do a deduction. You basically put money into a retirement account. You don't pay your income taxes on it today, but you will pay income taxes on it when you take it out for retirement.
Do you pay a payroll tax on it?
That's a good question. I got to remember if we do or not. I'm not sure. I don't think you do, but I got to double check. I'm not sure. Yeah. I double check. I usually don't. That question doesn't come up as often as you think it does. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But the primary deferral is income taxes.
Yes.
And so that's the big issue. And what it is it's an incentive for the employer to offer a benefit, and also the incentive for the employee to save. And what this ends up being is, you think again about that three-legged stool, we've gotten rid of basically for most workers the defined pension benefit plan. So we need to have some other program that fills in that leg of the three-legged stool, and that's the defined contribution plan. And the tax incentive to give a deferral is to help people save today so they have that income and then they retire and then they pay taxes on it then. That's kind of how the system is designed to work. And if you get rid of that tax incentive, then there might not be an incentive for employers to contribute off the plan. And there probably is going to be less incentive for people to actually save for their own retirement.
And these 401k plans are actually quite popular. I mean, there's roughly $5 trillion sitting in 401k alone, right? And I guess the cost to government, assuming, I hate that term, like basically assuming that every single income that you own needs to be taxed. The government is entitled to actually taxing you. So the cost of you deferring that tax is $185 billion in 2019. So that's the money basically that they're going after for the 401k. And so can you tell us what the proposals are?
Yeah, and I just did double check. You do have to pay payroll taxes on your contributions to 401k.
Okay, so it's only
so some of the proposals that are out there floating around now would basically to get
and there's a cap, by the way. I mean, it's not on your
Medicare. Medicare is uncapped.
Yeah, but there is also a cap of how much of your income you can defer. At least for 401k is what, like $18,000, 19. I don't remember what it is now. So, and Roth is like 7,000 or 8,000. It depends on the year, right?
Yeah, your income level.
Yeah. So it's not as if you could put like, your
entire salary if you're high income. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, it's capped. But again, the idea though, is when you think about this, when we talk about the proposal, but the idea is you're trying to design a system in which Social Security pays for basically 1/3. Think about your retirement when you get close to retirement. And if you were making $100,000 a year the year before you retired, and you wanted to replace 80% of that. So most advisors say you want 70 to 80% replacement rate. So you're making 100, you need $70,000 to $80,000. So if you think about how it's designed, you want Social Security to cover about 1/3 of that income, personal savings another third, and something from your 401k also a third. So the idea is not to allow for these large deferral plans, but enough that people can save over their lifetime in a meaningful way. So when they retire, they can support and have, again, like 1/3 of their income from a DC, defined contribution plan. And the proposal, so to get back into it now, would basically remove that tax incentive. So instead of saying if you put money into a retirement account today and you get a deferral, it would just say we're taxing you on it today. So all plans in some ways would either be a Roth, or if they remove all the tax incentives, you'd pay tax on your income today, save it, and still pay for it when you take it out in retirement.
Yeah. So, and the idea, by the way, why would they want to do this? In large part, it's because they want to bail out Social Security.
That's where most of the people have said that's where the money should go if we did this. But again, think about what that means. We're trying to find funding in some ways to finance that deficit of Social Security. But if we do that, we are strengthening up one of those legs by basically cutting off the other leg.
The other leg, yeah.
So it's still going to fall over.
So you, Chuck Blackhouse, and I wrote a paper for the Mercatus Center when this proposal came out to explain why we thought that was a good idea. It was a bad idea, sorry. And can you kind of say what is like let's start with the problem with the proposal. Let me actually read from one of the author who explains, she explained what this would do. Said first, the subsidy for private sector retirement plan do little to increase private savings. Two, the revenue raised from repealing these tax expenditure could be better used to address Social Security funding gaps. The tax expenditure under the personal income tax arise because employees can defer tax on compensation that they receive in the form of retirement savings. And so then you would get that 185%, $85 billion, which equals to 0.9% of GDP. And you would take that money and then you would pour it into Social Security. So what is your first big objection to this idea?
There's you said my first big one. So the first thing is I think there's a misunderstanding about how it does, whether or not it does increase personal savings and private savings. And I think you could have different economists argue, but I think we do see the evidence that people do save more for retirement and do save more because they have the tax deferral in an IRA and a 401k style plan. So the defined contribution system has done a very good job helping people save for retirement. Does that mean it's equally across income groups? No. Do we need to do more to make sure more people have access to it from employers? And if they're gig workers, definitely yes. But the system itself is working and can be improved, but it does increase savings. And there are some more people who now have retirement savings because they start earlier than they wouldn't have if we didn't have this type of system. And I think that's one of the biggest myths we have to attack is that this does not increase savings. And then some say, well, maybe it just shifts some savings from saving for a house to saving for retirement. I don't think that's accurate either. I think it actually overall increases savings, and it definitely increases retirement savings. And when we think about the context of Social Security, it's the retirement that's important. And again, we've got to think holistically. So robbing Peter to pay Paul does not help people have a more secure retirement.
Yes. And I think basically it's because, again, people have lost sight of this idea that Social Security was never meant and is not even designed to be able to cover 100% of people's retirement. And it's only actually possible in the context of other forms of saving. It's also kind of interesting because there's a fair amount of evidence that the existence of Social Security itself actually discourages saving, right?
If people again believe and think that Social Security is going to be their primary or only or cover all of their income in retirement, then why should I save on my own? Right. And yes. I think that's the problem is we still need to talk about that three-legged stool. Because there are still too many people who talk about Social Security as the only source of income in retirement and that it's enough for them. So they think about it as being a primary support. But again, that becomes a pogo stick, not a three-legged stool. And it's not enough for people. And you could argue whether or not, it's like some will argue, well, let's just make Social Security stronger. Let's just make it a primary benefit for everybody. But then, again, that would discourage savings. And again, the cost of doing that is very expensive. And one of the other sort of, critiques of the 401k system that people have written about, and why they're talking about maybe trying to change this, is they think it's very regressive and only helps basically upper income people. And I think that's also misleading. But if you want to be more nuanced, you could talk about the idea of strengthening the 401k system and then reducing Social Security's benefit for higher income workers. So it goes back to that insurance model for lower income and medium income workers. And you could tail benefits to the top and you strengthen the 401k style system. That would be a better way of talking about how to reform the retirement system.
So the thing that actually bothers me about that proposal the most is that actually it is presenting it, and it's often the case with tax expenditures, as basically a perk for savers, right? It's presenting it as if, and in fairness, a lot of tax expenditures are like that. But this is not the case. It's presenting it as if, the right thing would be to eliminate it, but we've decided to give a perk to savers. And that's really not what it is. That's a misunderstanding of why the tax preference actually, it's not a tax preference, is actually a tax credit exists.
So I think it's also important to have a quick conversation about what is and what is not a tax expenditure.
I agree.
Because the technical definition of a tax expenditure is something that deviates from a normal tax system. Well, what the hell is a normal tax system? And we've been lumping so many things into this now when it comes to tax expenditures, and it's basically become anything that reduces revenue for the government, as opposed to thinking about this that maybe tries to equalize the tax treatment that is important for tax neutrality. So I'll give you sort of two examples. One is it's a cap now, but there's a deduction for home mortgage interest deduction if you own a house. That is a tax expenditure because that is something where the government could just send you a check out of the government and say, look, we're going to support home ownership. I'm going to send you $1,000 a year as opposed to having a mortgage interest deduction. So it's like spending like treatment in the tax code. But with the 401k and the tax deferral, it's not technically a tax expenditure from our definition because it's not a tax cut. They're not sending you a check, and you're going to get taxed on it when you retire. So what the preference is it's all basically a bargain and a gamble whether your tax rate is going to be higher today when you're working than it is in retirement. If it is, you do a 401k traditional where you get a deferral. If it's not, you can do a Roth. But again, the whole idea is to equalize the tax treatment. So you're still being taxed. So a preference is a better word, but I don't like to call it a tax expenditure because, again, I don't think it's something like a spending like feature in the tax code. The money is deferred and it gets taxed later.
Just for listeners, I mean, if you're curious, just Google tax expenditures, Department of Treasury, and it will take you to an easy link where you can actually see the list. You have to kind of pass a bunch of pages, but at the end, there are a bunch of tables, and there's one in particular that actually lists all the tax expenditures. And you can see, I mean, the amount, it's basically the amount to 1.2 trillion, over a year, right?
And if you want to get, again, for listeners, they want a good short paper on tax expenditures, they can Google Donald Marin and tax expenditures. He had a really good piece of what is and what is tax.
But so in that list, to me, the way I think about it, so there are individual tax expenditures, there are corporate tax expenditures, and the ones that I would happily get rid of are the ones that are spending through the tax code for special interest. But I would not get rid of the one that actually are meant to limit the double taxation of income. And that's really the way I think about the preferential treatment for capital gains. It's not that it's there because somehow we want to give a perk to people who make gains from investing, from savings, really. It's actually because that income is already taxed, and that's a way to minimize the double taxation or triple taxation in some cases of that income. And it's the same way that I think about the tax preference for savers. I think about it as a way to basically limit the number of times the same income is getting taxed.
Yeah, and this is, two quick sort of talking points for educational purposes for listeners. One, the number one rule for any tax policy discussion is that only people pay taxes.
Yes. And
only living people. And what that means is it's the incidence or the burden of the taxation. So think about the corporate income tax. A corporation is, while it has some legal references that people might say it has some preferences of being a person, a corporation is not a person. It's a legal entity. It's a thing. Any income it makes gets passed down to either owners of capital, shareholders, owner business, workers, etc. So any kind of tax you put on a corporation, it has to get passed through. Either it's a lower return for investors, it's a lower wage for workers, or it's a higher price for consumers. So when someone says corporations aren't paying their fair share, what they're saying is people aren't paying their fair share. And what people, and that becomes a better question. So the double taxation is we first are taxing corporations, means there's less money to distribute down to people. So we want to reduce that tax to reduce the double taxation. That's kind of a really important lesson we start talking about tax policy.
And when it comes to the corporate income tax, really, there's just a lot of evidence now that workers are shouldering a big chunk of the tax increase in the form of lower wages.
Yes. And then the second one is when people talk about savers, and I think this is important too, savings is just foregone and future consumption.
Yes.
So you have $1 today, you can spend $1 today, you can save it and spend it tomorrow. And so what we don't want to do is discourage spending tomorrow or bias it over today. You want to basically make sure you account for it. And that's also not the form of not trying to tax savings too much.
So what do you think the impact of lifting that tax preference would have?
I think it would discourage employers from offering these plans. I think it would discourage employees from participating in these plans because there's no longer a tax benefit. So why would I want to save you might still want to save for retirement, but without that incentive and push, I think it would harm lower income and middle income workers more. So the complaint has been this is helping upper income workers, but I think it hurts lower and middle because right now with employers offering sometimes a match or an automatic enrollment, they are helping these people save that they wouldn't save on their own. So you're going to have millions of Americans who will end up with less savings overall, definitely less savings for retirement, put a larger burden on our financial welfare system in the future. And what it also means is that you'd have millions of Americans even more unprepared for retirement than they are today. And that's a horrible outcome.
Yeah. I also find that the argument that we need to get rid of the tax-deferred saving accounts because it's a subsidy for the wealthy is kind of a weird. If you actually think that savings is a good thing, and you and I have had these debates over whether the government should encourage savings, and I don't think it is. I think we should be neutral between consumption today or consumption tomorrow. That said, again, in the context of this discussion, I mean that preference is really about not taxing the same income many times. But what I find weird about this notion is like if really savings is a good thing, what you should do is if really you believe that this mostly benefits higher income people, then you should kind of figure out a way to extend the ability to save to lower income people. And so since the 401k has to be offered by an employer, like what are the ways for people to have access to these tax deferred savings when you're not employed in a firm that offers this? Yeah. That should be kind of really the way we think. But the fact that they're not doing this to me shows that it's really a revenue grab.
I agree. And I think that's also, and it's what bothers me is, again, it's not being discussed in a holistic manner because retirement security is a holistic problem. Mm-hmm. And again, I don't want to get into whether there's a crisis because people talk about crises and that makes it sound, but there definitely is a retirement challenge for many people. And the challenge we one, they haven't saved enough, or another challenge even for those who have saved sufficiently in like a 401k style plan. They don't know how to use that asset base and turn it into a stream of income that they can use throughout their lifetime and make it last a lifetime. Because again, the idea is, that three-legged stool is so important. And the defined benefit plans have now basically gone away unless you're a state or local worker. Very few of them are left in the private sector. That defined contribution plan now is that leg of the three-legged stool that has to be supported along with Social Security and still your individual savings. But that employer portion now is a DC, defined contribution benefit plan. And that defined contribution plan has to be supported. And if you get rid of these tax deferrals, I think that leg goes away or gets extremely cut. And that's unfortunate, I think, very problematic.
So let's talk about what those who want to get rid of the tax treatment of savings would want to do. And that's bailing out Social Security. So you've given some of the arguments for why it's actually counterproductive, right? Because you cut one of the stool leg and then you transfer to Social Security. But what are the other problem was bailing out Social Security in your opinion?
And this is where I think we do have to have a conversation about Social Security reform. Yes. And whether the term is, I want to avoid sort of the heuristics about bankruptcy, and I know people think about bailouts and they think it's like did someone wrong, like a bank, and they bail out because they made bad investments. The thing is with Social Security is we have promised benefits we cannot afford to pay under the current revenue system. So you have basically two options: find more revenue, which could include borrowing, which none of us really kind of want to do, or reduce benefits, or a combination of the two. And I think the problem with just saying we're going to try to find more money for Social Security is it fails then to allow us to have a discussion of what is out of whack with the program and what needs to go back to original intent or how we can tweak the program to make it better. And there are a lot of reform options out there. And again, I think one of the ones we should have more discussion about when thinking about retirement holistically is whether or not benefits should be curtailed for higher income workers. Support those at the bottom because it's a major support program, but you could curtail benefits at the top to save some money instead of trying to find additional revenue sources or additional borrowing, and figure out how that might look.
Now, this is actually one of the things that really kind of bothers me the most about the way we tend to talk about how to fix, our debt problems is that the underlying assumption that a lot of people have is that we need to find a way to fix the debt problem without changing anything else. So basically, we need to fill the gap one way or another. And in the case of Social Security, I'm very extreme compared to you in the sense that I actually think it's a system that doesn't make any sense as designed, precisely because, as was talked about, right, Social Security was created to take care of a real problem. The fact that people, when they stopped working, either often because they were too old or where they were sick, they were poor. But now this is not the case. Seniors are really overrepresented in the top income quintile, which doesn't mean that some seniors are not poor, but it means that a lot of seniors are doing well thanks to capital markets and to economic growth. And so we have this system that is designed to transfer money, leaving aside the demographic, to transfer money from younger people who are at the beginning of their lives or in the middle of their lives with a lot of cost, raising kids who are actually still going to college and paying a ton of taxes for those who are actually doing much better than them, much better. The system doesn't make any sense. And I'm so frustrated by the refusal to even actually talk about the fundamental problem with a system and to actually just say, you know what, let's find a way to keep the program exactly how it is, where everyone gets some Social Security and we'll just figure out a way to kind of pour more taxes into a bad system.
I think part of this too is when we think about personal responsibility and retirement plans and savings. So Social Security is now a pay-as-you-go system. Basically, money coming in today goes out. And so current workers are paying for current retirees. It is not a savings plan in the sense that you and I put money in an account with on it, and that's ours.
So you're telling me that there's no saving account with a bank account with my name on it?
Even though you might get a Social Security statement that shows your earnings and how much you paid in, there is no account with your name on it that you have legal responsibility or ownership of. And that's another misnomer I think some people don't understand too. One reason why I think it's also important to start talking more about supporting the current defined contribution system is that because it is a mechanism in which dollars go in today that get saved for your future. The problem with one, Social Security, but two, also the traditional defined benefit plans that a lot of people have, the pensions, is that money went in and it says, we'll give it to you in the future, but it's not necessarily your own ownership. We're going to promise you something. And if the return didn't happen, you didn't get it. The company went bankrupt. There was no other money coming in. So the defined pension plans were not supported financially well enough, and they basically have gone out of existence mostly. And this is what we're having with Social Security. People say, well, here's what I want. I want a larger benefit in the future. Well, how do we pay for it today? With the defined contribution plan, you and your employer know what you're putting in today, and that's there. It's yours. There's no backseats on it. It's yours. And then the point is you keep contributing and that grows. So the money is there for you. And that, I think, lessens the responsibility on society overall to pay for future benefits. And to your point about the wealth transfer, if I have my own defined contribution plan, when I retire, that's my money. I'm not asking for another worker to pay into it to support me. And I think we need to make sure for generational equity, we do more to support the 401k style plans, not less because of that. And then to your point about Social Security, we should talk about, again, what was the original intent of it? It's the old age and survivors insurance program, right? And the idea is insurance. You could see someone who had, back in the day when there was this one earner and a married couple and that one earner died, you had a survivor benefit. Now a lot of couples are two earner couples. Is that still an important benefit to have? If so, how do we look at it? When people were basically trying to live past 65, if they got there, you want to make sure they didn't outlive their savings. I would love to have a program that just is designed to say, if you outlive your savings because you haven't saved enough, you live longer, will kick in. So maybe Social Security doesn't start at 62 or 67. Maybe it starts at 70 or 72 or 75. and it really becomes old age insurance again. That would reduce the cost, which we could then use to promote other types of retirement plans. And again, go back to kind of that original intent.
Yeah. So what could we do to actually strengthen savings?
So we are doing, I think, a lot right now. So I actually like the current plan we have, the current structure for the defined contribution plan. To your point, though, I want to increase access. So what I want to do, we've done some of this with Secure and Secure 0.0. We've increased the savers match for lower income workers. I would like to see more on what we call the auto enrollment. So if you join an employer and they have a defined contribution retirement plan, you are automatically enrolled in it. You can opt out. I'm not going to force someone to do something, but behaviorally, we have seen that these defaults are very powerful. So one would be to automatically enroll people in a retirement savings account and then auto escalate their contributions over years. And again, you always have the option to change, but the default becomes very important. And then we're doing a lot more now to help portability. So if we think about people who are gig workers who don't have one employer or more than the idea of having one employer for life basically is gone now too. Like our parents and grandparents have one employer. I've had 10 employers in the 30 years I've been here. So you want portability. So you need to make sure that the account can go with you. So you need to make sure that portability is easy. And some people, when they leave their job, they take out their retirement savings. So we need to make portability automatic. So when someone leaves a job and goes somewhere else, it automatically follows them. And we can make that easier as well. And we're trying to do that with legislation. So I think part of this, we say how to make it stronger is Congress. Congress right now doesn't do much bipartisan, but one thing they do is retirement savings on a bipartisan basis still. And we've seen with Secure and Secure 2.0 how they have helped move the needle on access, portability, and also helping people take their asset base and they retire and helping to partially or annuitize some of that benefit so they have income in retirement. So we're getting there. And I think the point is, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's keep making improvements. But the system is working and can be improved, and we are improving it.
Yeah. So one thing we haven't talked about is like the Roth type accounts, right? It's different. It's the same, but it's different than the 401k in the sense that it's a reverse process. You put money in that is already been taxed, and then the promise, which is
promise.
It's a promise, which is worth what it's worth with the government, is that when you retire, you're going to be able to have access not only to the money you save, but the earning from that income, but that savings, and it will be tax free, right? And so there are people also who are saying, well, why don't we just actually kind of basically defer, like we end the 401k and we put everything in the Roth, so the government gets the income now and then just kind of forego it tomorrow.
And this is a question we have. It's called the Rothification, and a lot of reasons why this comes up in conversation is because the government is trying to find money today and forget it's also going to need money tomorrow.
Yes.
So imagine if we said all retirement plans are now going to be a Roth. And so you basically get money in now because you're taxing that income that's coming in that was being deferred. But when we retire, they're not going to tax it. They promise, right? Pinky swear. They're not going to tax it. And so they lose the revenue later. And so the congressional budget process is a 10-year budget window. So Roth actually, quote unquote, brings in money in a 10-year window. But of course, it doesn't bring in money in future years. And we can have a discussion whether or not it should be Roth or traditional, because the traditional is the deferral. And I think it depends on individual preferences. I'm not sure I want to force one or the other. For some people who are in a lower tax bracket now, like a younger worker, they might be better off putting money into a Roth, because when they retire, they might be in a higher income, where if you get to be middle-aged and you're in a higher bracket today, you want to do a traditional because you'll be in a lower income bracket, presumably when you retire. I think we should have that option. I like having both. And I'm not sure I want to force one into the other. But even if you did a Roth style, that still means you're giving a tax benefit for retirement, which some of the scholars out there don't want to do at all, because that still would be foregone revenue, quote unquote, from the government they want to put towards something else. And I think what's important to realize is how, from a societal standpoint, we have gotten to the point where we now recognize the importance of retirement savings. Because if you don't have it, you become a larger burden on the public welfare system, whether that's Social Security or something else. But it also means there's a gap that has to be made up. And if we're not going to have larger welfare programs because they can't afford it or don't want to pay for it, then we have to have some incentives for people to save on their own to make up that gap. And if we get rid of this 401k style system, that gap's going to be there for people, and they're just going to have a lower quality of life, and that's not going to be good.
Isn't kind of a way to address the lower income people or the people who work in a sector that is not providing like a savings account, to do a universal savings account?
Yeah, you can do something like that. And some states are offering state plans now. And I think we're seeing like there was a move. There are still some proposals out there to create a national style retirement savings defined contribution plan, similar to what the US government has for its employees, called the Thrift Savings Plan. So they'd have a national thrift savings where if your employer didn't offer a plan or you were a gig worker and didn't have access to a plan, you could be enrolled in a national 401k style plan like the federal government has for its employees. And I think, 10 years ago or so, when we started having these conversations, or even 15, I think it had merit because back then, one, there wasn't any state plans. We didn't have Secure 1 and Secure 2.0. And a lot of financial services firms were only interested in customers that had a higher income base. Now that's kind of shifted. We have state plans. We have employers going after smaller accounts. We have firms that are willing to take on smaller accounts. They know those accounts grow to become larger accounts. So I think that problem it's been correcting itself over time. I'd like to see that continue to move forward without changing at the moment. I think it is making advancements.
What do you think is a political, or how much at risk are we to actually see the calls to end the tax preference on saving accounts?
I think it's getting a lot of attention now because of the novelty and the fact that you have people who are on the left and the right partnering in some ways. But this isn't a large group yet. This is still a small number of people who are talking about it.
But I remember a few years ago, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee had put it in his tax proposal too.
Was that for the Roth?
Yeah, it was for Brady. It was Chairman Brady. Yeah, and he was talking about like moving away for the 401k. Now he had a proposal for a universal savings account, which I really like universal savings account because they are basically tax deferred accounts, but what they have that all these accounts like 401k or 529, it's like there's no penalty for withdrawing money from them before a certain event, like your kids going to college or you retire. And as such, it creates an additional incentive for people to save, because it is true that committing to putting that money away when you worry that you may actually need it in the future could be a disincentive to save. So I really like a universal savings account, and the evidence from the UK and Canada actually shows that they're really successful at giving incentives to save for lower income people.
I think we could have, when you start thinking about like automatic enrollment, some people have made the argument like for lower wage workers, lower income workers, it could be a burden to take more money out of their paycheck today. They might pay today to put it in retirement. So I think part of this, when I start looking at this holistically, is I want to do more to encourage employers to offer plans and to have a match. And what you could do is have something in which the employer match definitely gets locked up for retirement. Maybe there's some preferences for partial annuitization when the person is retirement age, so they can delay claiming Social Security to a later age and get a higher monthly benefit. But the money that they put in could have less restrictions in some ways for emergencies.
Yeah. But aren't you worried, though, that the more we incentivize employers to do this, what it means is they look at total compensation, right? And so what effectively it means is that it's basically kind of saying we favor one mix of compensation, and it's one that actually has the share of wages being smaller because there's a growing share of the total compensation that is a benefit. Yep. Right. And so effectively, this is what I don't like. And I keep telling my conservative friends when they're clamoring for mandating that companies provide paid leave or other forms of benefits. I said, you realize that effectively what you're doing is flattening the growth of wages, right? Which is all well and fine when you make a decent amount of money, but when your base is actually quite small, I really have a problem with this.
So this, I agree with you. And so the only caveat I would make is there's a difference between mandates and offerings. So if an employer offers a 401k plan with a match and another employer does not, then you can have an potential employee look at total compensation and decide where they want to go.
I agree.
What we are seeing now
is the same as paid leave.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm not a big fan of the mandates, but I do like the auto enrollment feature. And I could say mandate auto enrollment with a deferral or with an opt out, because then the person is basically getting the behavioral incentive, but they don't want it. They're not forced into it. So that's that libertarian paternalism nature that you don't necessarily like that I have, but I think that's a good way of getting to it.
And by the way, for those listening, these are debates that Jason and I have been having for years.
But I think when you start thinking about total compensation, it's important because people do not necessarily realize that healthcare is a cost to the employer, paid leave is a cost to the employer, retirement plan is a cost to the employer, furniture is a cost to the employer. So everything you start thinking about what goes into total compensation becomes important. Taxes, right? Payroll taxes, of course, everything basically becomes important. That's the incidence. It's very important to talk about tax policy. I want to facilitate and make it easier for companies and small businesses to offer these plans. And I think that's important to encourage and to design because of the retirement challenge that we have. I don't want to mandate something because, again, that's just a cost that's passed on. For some people, they might not need it. But we are seeing with employees that they like having these, let's call them employee wellness type programs, that they in some ways do shop around for employers that have them. So again, I think it should be a benefit that we facilitate and make it easier to offer, and then let the individual pick where they want to work if they can choose where they go based on the employer offerings, and they can ask. When we hire, we get asked all the time, what is your 401k pay, or as far as it's a 403b? But they ask, do you have any, another one is, do you allow for any sort of tuition reimbursement? Right? Tuition reimbursement is a benefit, but it comes out of generally the overall wages we pay. But some potential employees would like that benefit and are willing to forego some salary. They may not realize they're foregoing a salary, but it becomes a competitive market, and the marketplace for labor is competitive. And I think that's important that we have that conversation too.
Yeah, and I really wish like people realize that all these benefits come out of their wages. I mean, I think this is like, if we could get through, because people complain about wages not growing as fast as they should, but they don't realize that actually a third of total compensation now on average is all these fringe benefits, with healthcare, of course, being the biggest of all. And when the cost of healthcare explodes, in large part because the enormous government involvement in the system, it means that their wages flatten. I mean, and so this is why it makes me so sad to see conservatives joining the call for adding more of these fringe benefits automatically. Anyway, it just, because ultimately down the road, they're going to be complaining that wages are not growing fast enough. But that's one of the reason.
The distinction we should make is there's a difference between facilitating and providing and lowering the barriers to having employers offer these programs versus a mandate that would just increase costs or reduce wages.
Yeah. Let me ask you, what do you think would happen if Social Security ended up getting this, let's say, $200 billion additional revenue a year? Do you think it would give an incentive for Congress to then promise more benefits, or do you think they would actually use it really to try to, just fix some of the problem that Social Security is facing?
So I think that's a really good question. It's hard to design a crystal ball to answer it, but I would offer up sort of just tea leaves. Right now, you see more politicians trying to increase benefits, and we're already having a problem paying for the ones we've promised, if you want to call it a promise. And so I think what would end up happening is that until we start seeing really credible reforms from a larger proportion of members of Congress about trying to solve the challenges we have. In other words, how do we right-size Social Security with the current benefit structure and do something with the finances, whether it's increasing revenue, reducing benefits to match it, some sort of compromise. Until we start seeing more of that, I think that you're right that if we just pour more money into it, that there'll be greater calls for additional benefit increases, as opposed to just saying, oh, we got some revenue, now we can pay what we promised, we're good to go. I don't think that would happen. I think they try to increase it.
Ugh, so many
revenue, but we got to be
so many reasons to be against these proposal to get rid of the tax preference on savings.
That does not mean I want to wait and have Social Security necessarily benefits cut across the board for everybody. I think we should be more We should
No,
be having a conversation now. In fact, we're already probably 10 years too late, but we should be having a conversation now about right-sizing Social Security.
Yes. So let me ask you one last question. What is the most mistaken claim you'd like to correct on this particular issue?
I would like to correct the misnomer that the 401k style defined contribution plans are not helping Americans save for retirement. I think that's a misnomer. I think it helps across the income spectrum, and we should do more to support it, not try to get rid of it or curtail it.
Well, thanks so much, Jason. This was fun.
As always, Vero, thank you for having me on.